What's up, guys? It's Joe. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Analyst YouTube channel, joined again by Luke, as always. Guys, week 2 underway. We're super excited that fantasy football is here, and fantasy football is here to stay for the next however many months. Was it 6 months that we get every Sunday enjoyment? So excited about that. Guys, if you have not already, make sure you are checking out Underdog. You can sign up now, use code ANALYST. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. So we put out some pick'ems yesterday. Some of them hit, some of them didn't. But, for the most part, that's up for you guys. You guys can go on there and make your own picks. They have really cool drafts that you can do. And you can draft a team for one night against one other person, two other people. You come out on top and you end up making the most money. So it works out. It's a lot of fun. Definitely recommend you guys go check that out. Now, the topic of the matter, Luke, last night's game. We got Kirk Cousins and the Vikings playing against the Eagles. Eagles wiped the floor with them early. Vikings started to come back a little bit, but could not do enough. The storyline of the day, DeAndre Swift. Luke, tell us a little bit about last game. What are your thoughts? What are your takeaways?
Yep. Almost exactly what I expected. I did not personally expect this huge DeAndre Swift game, but that's exactly what we got. He was the workhorse. There's nothing else to really be said about it. The running backs were only just coming in to give him a rest. He was getting the ball. Felt like every play. I know there were other plays in there, but it felt like every time the Eagles had the ball, it was in DeAndre Swift's hands, and he made the most of it. Good matchup, as we did know. Eagles O-line against the Vikings D-line is a mismatch, and if there was someone who was going to get the ball, they were probably going to do well. But the fact that Swift had the bulk of the carries there, as opposed to a little committee, was definitely promising for him.
And allow me to show, this is a tweet that Luke put up, actually. I know it says my name, but don't be confused by that. So Luke actually put this up last night. Eagles running backs have a great matchup tonight behind their O-line versus the Vikings. The way you manage your Eagles running backs could win/lose your fantasy matchup this week. We'll have to wait. So you were pretty spot on here. You did mention that your gut says will be messy, and honestly, that's everybody's gut going to this game, right? I don't think anybody expected the Eagles to do as well as they did with DeAndre Swift in that backfield, but they went off. But guys, this is an opportunity to kind of plug our Twitter here. Luke's putting out some great content on Twitter. I'm putting out some content on Twitter as well. We're also on TikTok now, apparently. We have 10,000 followers. I don't know how that happened, but definitely go check us out on Twitter, because Luke actually did come through with another one here too. This one was very spot on. So Jordan Addison for tonight is a solid start this week, going against an Eagles secondary that's missing James Bradbury. Darius Slay will be shadowing Justin Jefferson, leaving backups to cover Addison/Osborne when lining up outside. Jefferson is number one, but play Addison. So, also another really good take right there. Addison, if you guys are unaware, and if you see on the bottom here, he actually ended up having a pretty decent game for the second week in a row. He had 3 catches, 72 yards, 1 touchdown, results in about 16 points. If you played him, you're happy with that. Osborne actually, I believe, scored a touchdown as well. So really hitting your stride there on Twitter, Luke. I think Addison also had a 75% route participation rate, and I think that comes from our friend Alex Caruso on Twitter. That's improving since week 1, where he had a 56% rate. So Addison getting more involved as the weeks go on. Any other takeaways from this Vikings side of the ball from yesterday's game?
There is one small takeaway, and that's that I'm starting to panic about Alexander Mattison a little bit. Actually, a lot. I wasn't huge on Mattison coming into the year, but it felt like everyone else was so low on him that I ended up with him in a couple of leagues. And maybe everyone else was right. That's now 2 fumbles in the first quarter of 2 games. And just another inefficient day. He's getting the workload. He's not holding onto the football, and he's not doing anything with it when he does hold on to it.
Yeah, and I think drafting Alexander Mattison is exactly what you said. It's this guy looks like he's going to be a workhorse. Why is everybody, passing on him so much? even if he's not the greatest running back in the NFL, it's not that hard to be a good running back in the NFL right now. So why not take a chance on this guy if you can get him in the 5th round? But evidently, he's showing us why we can't take a chance on him in the 5th round. He is just playing very poorly. So if you have Alexander Madison, as you mentioned, I don't even think it's worth buying low because I think it might get to the point where the Vikings feel like they need to add someone else, maybe trade for someone else. They'll probably give him one more game of a full run, but if he does nothing with it, I'd imagine they'll start looking for other options because this offense needs help badly right now. Especially on the running side of the ball. On the passing side of the ball, I mean, Kirk Cousins has 4 touchdowns, almost 400 yards yesterday. Justin Jefferson, 11 catches, 159 yards. So passing side of the ball, they're doing okay. But other than that, they could use some help. So let's move on. We're moving on, Luke. We're moving on to the Sunday games. We got the Bills and the Raiders. We're going to start out with that game being played at 1 o'clock. On the Bills side of the football, Josh Allen hopefully making a comeback here. James Cook. All the talk is going to be about James Cook this week. Last week, as we know, for James Cook, he played 60% of the offensive snaps, and he had 16 touches in that game. I expect for that usage to continue, especially against the Raiders team, where the Bills should be ahead early, and Cook is going to have a chance to really run it out. He didn't show up on the fantasy point spectrum last week, but he has a good chance of doing so this week. Any other Bills players you're really excited about going into this game?
No, you're spot on with James Cook. Stephon Diggs, but that's kind of, first round pick. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
And then from the Raiders side of the ball, Jacoby Myers currently dealing with a concussion. I don't believe he's practiced. Today is going to be a pretty big day for that. But these days in the NFL, if you have a concussion in the last week, you're not playing the next week. That's just, it seems like last year that was more true than ever. I think what they used to do is like, if you get a concussion, you can clear protocol before Sunday, you're good to go. But it seems like that protocol has been adjusted, and it would be very shocking to me if Jacoby Myers actually played in this game. So I believe Jacoby Myers is going to be out. Josh Jacobs, he's got a better chance to have a better game this week. Devontae Adams, we know what he's all about. I don't think there's anyone else really even in this offense worth talking about for the Raiders if Jacoby Myers is not going to be out there. And I think Jacoby Myers last week, we kind of talked about it, was a product of Pat Surtain being all over Devontae Adams and just Jimmy Garoppolo having to look another way, knowing that Adams is going to be covered as much as he was. And that's kind of what happened, especially in the red zone. But not really too much else to say there. We can go on to this Bengals and Ravens game here being played at 1 o'clock. Luke, why don't you start us off with some Ravens players? Do you think Lamar's going to be able to bounce back this week? Is Joe Burrow going to bounce back this week?
Yeah, I'm expecting a big bounce back from both teams, honestly. I mean, the Ravens won last week, but the offense did look a little messy. Mark Andrews should be back. I think that will lead to a slight decrease in value for Zay Flowers, who had 10 targets last week, something like that. Led the team by a mile.
45% target share.
Right. Andrews back will sort of limit Flowers and the rest of those receivers to an extent. We'll have to see how they all play together, especially in a new offense. You never know. There could be more passing. We'll find out this week, but I'm lowering my expectations for all these receivers. Running back wise, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill. Everyone seems to be on the Justice Hill train just because he scored 2 touchdowns last week. Just the eye test tells me that Gus, I don't know how tall and how much these guys weigh, but I'm pretty sure Gus Edwards has to have 50 pounds on Justice Hill. Justice Hill is just smaller. I don't think he's going to be getting these goal line carries every single week. They did just about split evenly the snaps and the touches. I think Hill might have had 1 or 2 more snaps last week, but they had the same amount of touches. If I had to pick one, I'm leaning more on the side of Gus Edwards, but it seems like they might even both be viable for now. I mean, we've seen it in the past. We've seen both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards be relevant at the same time. So if this is a complete 50-50, I still think both of them have weekly touchdown upside.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when it comes to the Ravens side of the football as well, is Lamar can easily take those touchdowns also. Melvin Gordon's expected to be elevated from the practice squad and be a part of this team. So we'll have to see how he mixes in as well. This backfield is just going to end up being a mess. And I don't want any part of it. Gus Edwards did take more of the rushing attempts when J.K. Dobbins did go down. So if I have to pick a running back, as you mentioned, it's probably going to be Gus Edwards. But we also haven't seen Gus Edwards get a full workload in, I think it's been like 2 or 3 years. So there's a lot of questions on this Ravens offense right now. Wide receiver wise, you mentioned Zay Flowers. He had a huge target share last week. I think the exact number, 45.5%, 10 targets. The next closest person on the team had 3 targets, and that's OBJ and Bateman. Bateman also only played like 56% of the offensive snaps, while Zay and Odell Beckham played like 80%. So I'm fine starting Zay Flowers this week as a flex / wide receiver 2 play. I think it's a good matchup against Cincy as well. So I have not too much hesitation in starting Zay, only the fact of Mark Andrews coming back and how he's going to affect this team. But we'll see. I think Todd Monken's going to call for more passing, especially against a team like the Bengals, who, as we know, are a typical AFC championship / playoff team. So I think they're going to have to be forced to throw the ball a little bit more in this game. And on the other side of the ball, with Joe Burrow, I think he's going to bounce back this week. As you mentioned, Joe Mixon, he was clearly the bell cow last week. T. Higgins last week, 0 catches on 8 targets. Guys, buy low on T. Higgins if you still can. Otherwise, I'm starting T. Higgins this week. Last week was kind of a fluke, especially with Joe Burrow and how he was playing. So Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, fire him up for sure. Next game here, Jaguars Chiefs. I feel like, Luke, this might be your favorite game of the week to watch. Calvin Ridley, watch your guy Trevor Lawrence. Take a moment, Luke. Soak in your Calvin Ridley take. Luke came in very strong. So I made a post about Calvin Ridley maybe like early August, late July, something like that. But Luke was kind of like the catalyst for the Calvin Ridley train. He was very set. He tried to get him in every league he could. Take a minute, soak it in. Calvin Ridley looks really good so far. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and Trevor Lawrence too. About half the leagues I have Ridley in, I have them stacked with Trevor Lawrence, and that was just about as good of a start as I could have asked for. Ridley was his favorite target by a mile. Only when they were starting to run away with that game did he start throwing to Zay Jones and people like that. Christian Kirk was an afterthought. And then the game got close again at the end. And he was throwing to Calvin Ridley again. The connection is there. It looks great. Both players on an individual level look great as well. But together they created a couple of fantasy wins for me last week. And yeah, I was here all off season. I'm still here. Every week I'm going to be excited to watch these guys play. And this should be a good one against the Chiefs. We had that Dolphins Chargers game last week that everyone said was going to be high scoring, and it was. And if there's one that I had to pick this week, it'll be this one.
Yeah, I'm on the same board. And someone who I like a lot this week is Travis Etienne. So Travis Etienne last week, he was able to take a total of 18 carries for 77 yards. He got a touchdown from that as well. 5 targets, also very encouraging for Travis Etienne. He had 80% of the offensive snaps last week with 23 touches total. He came in 4th as far as snap leaders last week. So Travis Etienne, someone I like a lot this week. He's currently my running back, this week, my running back 2 for this week behind Christian McCaffrey. I'm a huge Travis Etienne fan. And, we talk about Tank Bigsby and like what he was able to do. Tank Bigsby had a really bad fumble last week, and he had 1.9 yards per carry. So if I'm betting on anyone in this backfield, I think it's going to be Etienne. The Chiefs, run defense is not all that great right now. They did just get Chris Jones back, but I don't think it's going to be enough to call them a top 5 run defense or anything crazy like that. So Travis Etienne, one of my favorite plays this week, about DFS or anything like that. Calvin Ridley, as you mentioned. On the Chiefs side of the ball, Travis Kelce should be coming back this week. What do we think? I mean, obviously you're starting Travis Kelce, but how does this affect the rest of the Chiefs, especially the running backs, who had a very messy kind of split there? Isaiah Pacheco, 48% of the snaps, 12 touches. You got Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming back into the fold with 7 touches, 22% of the snaps, and Jerick McKinnon with 31% of the snaps, but 1 touch. I mean, what do we think about the rest of this team?
Yeah, Travis Kelce is definitely going to make this more messy than it was last week. And I mean, you're talking about the running backs were messy last week. What about those receivers? Felt like everyone was grabbing a target every now and then. And definitely staying away from the receivers. As I said, this is my pick to be one of those massive scoring games this week. If
Yeah.
anything happens, if any of those happen this week, it will be this one, in my opinion. But I don't know who I can trust. I can trust Travis Kelce. I don't trust Kadarius Toney. I don't trust Rashee Rice yet. I, I don't know who I can trust. From a running back perspective, I think you'll remember last year this was happening as well. And then by about midway through the season, we started seeing Jerick McKinnon 60% snap share,
Yep.
2 touches. And I was like, you know what? This is pretty strange. Just threw McKinnon on my roster because why not? And he ended up winning me our league. So that might happen again this year. I think they probably don't want McKinnon to get hurt. He's had injury issues in the past, and this is, if they do it again this year, it'll be the 3rd year running that they've sort of just held him in there for blocking at the beginning of the season and then really unlocked him towards the end to get him fired up for the playoffs. And it's worked for them in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they're going again. All this to say, I think Isaiah Pacheco is a good start this week. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it was sort of a meme on the internet after last week. He missing a couple of wide open holes. Twitter was bashing him for that. He didn't look great when he had the ball. Isaiah Pacheco is the guy who we've seen him be when he has the ball. He just won't go down. He runs as fast as he can the second the ball's in his hands. I think they like him. He did have the most snaps last week. I think he's the play out of this backfield.
And interesting enough, you talked about all the Chiefs receiving options last week. 12 different people saw at least one target from Patrick Mahomes last week, including our guy, Kadarius Toney. And I say our guy very lightly, but as a joke of Luke being a Giants fan here. But yeah, so a lot of distribution last week without Travis Kelce. I think behind Kelce, we're going to see more distribution. I think also Rashee Rice, 5 targets last week, among the top, believe it or not. I think it was actually tied for the most targets on the team. So just keep an eye out for that, although I'm not really trusting it all that well. Next game up, we got Titans versus the Chargers. The Tennessee Titans last week, kind of a sad game against the Saints. But what was really promising was DeAndre Hopkins getting 13 targets last week. That's kind of what we wanted to see if you have DeAndre Hopkins on his team. If he's able to play in this game, I think he's got a great matchup against the Chargers. We saw the Chargers get wrecked by Tyreek Hill last week. DeAndre Hopkins would be in a position to do that as well, although he did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. So if D-Hop does play, which he rarely misses games due to injury, I am starting DeAndre Hopkins very confidently this week. If he doesn't, then you might have to look for other options. I think the way this Titans offense works, you're really only comfortable with Henry, even with Treylon Burks being there. I don't know if I'd really feel confident putting Treylon Burks in my lineup with DeAndre Hopkins out. Also, something to watch is the running back room for the Titans. Derrick Henry got out-snapped by Tyjae Spears. And it's funny because we put out our running back snaps post or running back usage post this past week, and we had Tyjae Spears with more snaps than Henry. And we must have gotten like 20 comments saying like, "Oh, you messed up the Titans. There's no way Derrick Henry had less snaps." Or is that true? Did Derrick Henry really get? Yeah, Tyjae Spears out-snapped Derrick Henry. So you got to look at how he's going to be used in this offense. I think that if they get down a ton, there's a chance Spears can come in and be kind of that pass catching back. But we'll see. We'll see. What are your thoughts on the Chargers side of the ball here? Austin Eckler maybe not playing in this game.
Yeah, it didn't seem like a major injury, and I wasn't really expecting him to miss time with it. I have him in a couple of leagues. I'm not too concerned, but now it's starting to get into dicey territory. He also didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. Today will be again a big indicator. I mean, it's pretty much just plug and play. If Eckler misses, you put Josh Kelly in your lineup. I don't think Kelly has that upside that Eckler has. He's not going to see, the 10 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown just receiving. But I think a solid low RB2 / flex play if Eckler misses. If Eckler plays, obviously you're keeping him out of your lineup. And then from a receiver's standpoint, I think this is a good matchup for Mike Williams. We saw last week the Saints versus the Titans. The Titans didn't give up many points or many touchdowns, but all the Saints receivers were sort of getting peppered with targets. Chris Olave, I think, went over 100 yards. Michael Thomas looked good. And Rashid Shaheed had a long touchdown and I think 5 catches for 86 yards. Sounds familiar, if that's correct. So we saw the Saints receivers, all 3 of them had viable fantasy games last week. So I think this is a good spot for Mike Williams as the secondary option in this offense to get something going this week.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Sweet. Okay, so I don't mean to turn this into a Luke victory lap episode, but I mean Jordan Love last week looks fantastic, and this was Luke's guy going to the year. So talk a little bit about Jordan Love. What are your expectations against the Falcons here? There's a chance Christian Watson, another guy who did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but was thought to be able to play this week. Again, today on Friday, we're recording this about, 9 in the morning right now. So we don't have the practice reports for Friday yet. But if Christian Watson, if DeAndre Hopkins, if Austin Eckler practice today in a limited fashion, I would say there's a good chance they end up playing Sunday. Typically, when those guys practice on Friday, even in limited availability, they'll be good to play. And just the opposite, if they do not practice today, I would expect for the most part that they miss this week's game. So talk to us a little bit about the Falcons and Packers, especially Jordan Love. And if Christian Watson's out, maybe even Aaron Jones, who are also doing cover, could potentially be missing this game. So what are your thoughts?
Yep. Jordan Love looked great last week. I'm still a huge fan. However, this week is going to be a tougher matchup against a better Atlanta defense. I mean, Chicago's defense, we mentioned it last week. It's just a bunch of nobodies out there. I'm sorry, Bears, but they just looked lost. Jordan Love was tearing them apart. Aaron Jones was tearing them apart. It was just a mess out there. So Jordan Love did look good, but we'll see what happens this week against a better Falcons defense, a better Falcons team, and potentially no Christian Watson and no Aaron Jones. I mean, AJ Dillon did not look great last week at all, even against this Bears defense. So we'll see if he can step into that full-time workhorse role if Aaron Jones misses, which is there anything to be said about these Packers hamstrings? I mean, Watson missed week 1 with a hamstring. Romeo Doubs was questionable with a hamstring. He ended up playing. And by the way, if Watson misses again, he's in my lineups again this week. And Aaron Jones missing practice with a hamstring. Something's up there.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that it seems to be the hamstring epidemic in the NFL right now. That's what a lot of people are calling it, really. But with potentially no Christian Watson and maybe even no Jaden Reed and maybe even no Aaron Jones, we got a lot of injured players on this Packers team. I think the focal point that you should be looking for as the beneficiary on this team would be Luke Musgrave. So last week, top 2 players on the team had 5 targets. That's meaning Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, only 18.5% target share. Luke Musgrave right behind with 4 targets. He had an 80% route participation rate, which is an elite number for tight ends. If Christian Watson misses, if Jaden Reed misses, I'm expecting Luke Musgrave to have a very good game. I would easily slot him in as a starting tight end, and it's not hard to be a top 5 to tight end in this league right now. We saw last week how much of a wash tight end was. Hunter Henry was like the tight end 1, and Hayden Hurst was the tight end 2, all because they scored a simple touchdown. I think Luke Musgrave has that upside if Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and Aaron Jones are all to miss, or even not. Even if Christian Watson does play, I still think Luke Musgrave is a pretty solid start, especially with how involved he is in this offense. So Luke Musgrave, a guy I'm definitely looking to play this week if you're in a position where you don't have a great tight end. So excited for that. On the flip side of the ball here, we got the Falcons players, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier. Last week, Tyler Algier, he seems like he looked like the running back 1 on this team, which is kind of odd. Tyler Algier also had 16.7% target share. Bijan, although led the team with 6 targets, he's very involved in the passing game. One interesting tidbit about Tyler Algier is that in the 4th quarter, Tyler Algier had, I believe it was 86% of the team's rushing attempts in the 4th quarter. So when you look at how the game played out and how much they were ahead by, the Falcons were just trying to close that game out. It was close in the 4th quarter, but they knew they had the lead and they really wanted to just close that game out. That's why they gave the ball to Tyler Algier as much as they did. I'm not expecting that every week. I'm not expecting the Falcons to be in a position where they're going to be closing out a game that they're winning. I know it's the NFC, but at the same time, I don't think that's going to be that kind of game against the Packers. So I'm going to have caution starting Tyler Algier. I'm not confidently starting Tyler Algier at all this week, but I am confident about Bijan Robinson and his involvement, regardless of what Tyler Algier did last week. But what do we think about Kyle Pitts and Drake London? I saw you put a tweet out about those guys. Unfortunately, I don't have that screenshot here, but tell me a little bit about whether you're buying those guys, staying away from those guys, or what's going on with Drake London and Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, I would say I'm hesitantly buying both of them. It's clear that when everything goes the Falcons' way, what happened last week is what they want to do. They want to run the ball every single play if they could. I think they would do it.
Yeah.
Just there's not going to be that type of volume every week for Pitts in London. However, more often than not, the Falcons are not going to be able to play like that. It's just not sustainable. They're not going to be blowing out their opponents in the third quarter every week. This offense isn't explosive enough to do that. It's one of the best rushing offenses in the league, but rushing offenses by nature tend to not be very explosive. Even with Bijan Robinson and this great run blocking offensive line and the creative run play calling of Arthur Smith, it's not going to happen every week. Maybe it does this week, maybe it doesn't. We'll see how the Packers show up against a slightly better offense than they played against last week. But as for the rest of the season outlook and for this week for Pitts in London, I would hesitantly buy both. This week, I'm probably leaning a little bit more towards Kyle Pitts just because Jair Alexander playing on the outside might be a problem for Drake London. Either way, I'm expecting more than 0 targets for Drake London like we saw last week. But yeah, I'm not very confident in either of these guys until we see a game where the Falcons have to throw the ball. But if you don't have any people drafted Kyle Pitts probably as their starting tight end, if you don't have another option, I don't think it's the end of the world to have Kyle Pitts in your lineup this week.
And again, if you don't have another option, there are guys in the waiver wire who we're going to talk about. One being Luke Musgrave, who we already touched on. 2 being Sam Laporta, who we're going to cover very shortly. And 3 being Jake Ferguson, who led the Cowboys in target share last week. So definitely 3 guys to really keep an eye out. Sam Laporta, he had an 88.8% route participation rate last week. It's a great number for a tight end. As I mentioned, those are elite numbers. He's very much involved in the offense. And that was his first week, as a rookie, making his debut in the NFL. So going forward against the Seahawks, I'm feeling pretty comfortable starting Laporta as my tight end if I'm in a position where I have to. If I have someone like Kyle Pitts and I'm not sure how he's going to do, I'm fine putting Laporta in my lineup. And just the same if I have any other tight end who I'm not confident with. You have Dalton Schultz. Right now, Dalton Schultz is not looking like he's going to be a consistent part of this offense. So I have a league where I have him and I had to plug someone else in. So that's that. As far as the rest of this Lions offense goes, Jahmyr Gibbs, how do we feel? I mean, last week, 8 points. He barely saw the field. I think he's played 29% of the offensive snaps. He didn't get as many touches as we'd hoped. David Montgomery was kind of leading the back there. But the team is repeatedly saying they're going to keep getting Jahmyr Gibbs more and more involved. After last year with DeAndre Swift, I think I'm kind of scarred from this Lions backfield. But what do we think here? Do we feel comfortable starting Jahmyr Gibbs this week against the Seahawks?
I do. I think even if we only see him go up to 35, 40% of the snaps here, we saw him get 8 points barely touching the ball and seeing the field last week. He looked explosive when he did, and I think this is just a great matchup for Montgomery and Gibbs. I'm actually comfortable starting both of them.
Sweet. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And then obviously you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown. We already talked about Sam Laporta. Going on the flip side of the ball with the Seahawks, Geno did not have a great debut last week. Hoping that can kind of improve this week. DK Metcalf is someone we're starting. Jackson Smith and Jigba, do we feel more comfortable putting him in our lineup based on how involved he was last week? And that was his first game back from a major injury, which we weren't sure if he was even going to play week 1. And now we're the case where he looks like a consistent starter on this team. So are we flexing Jackson Smith and Jigba if we're a little desperate this week?
Yes, I think pretty much any of the Seahawks receivers has potential this week. And this might be another one of those weekly fantasy headaches where you just don't know which Seahawks receiver is going to be the guy. I tend to lean more towards DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba. That might just be the recency and the high draft capital spent on them. I'm not sure, but I do like DK Metcalf this week, which, side tangent, I'm kind of surprised he didn't get suspended after last week. I heard, who did he shove? One of the players on the Rams. He just shoved him from behind after a play and gave him a concussion, or he was in concussion protocol. And
Really?
I'm kind of
I don't know about
surprised
that.
he didn't get suspended. But if he's playing, it seems like he's fine, and he has a good matchup. He'll probably have a great game. And I think this is a sneaky good matchup for Ken Walker as well. I like all the running backs this week.
Yeah, big running back fan for this week. Let's talk about this game here. Not a lot of great running backs to review in this one, but Texans versus Colts. Last week, Dameon Pierce played less than 50% of the offensive snaps. I'm hoping that can change this week against the Colts. It's a better matchup for him, but again, not a matchup where I'm overly confident. If I have Pierce, I'm likely still starting him in this situation. As far as the rest of the Texans receivers go, apparently Tank Dell is supposed to get more involved as the season goes on. Hopefully we see a little more of that this week for all my Tank Dell bench stashes that I have in each league, especially the leagues where you get points for punt returns because he's doing punt returns as well. But it would be nice to see him kind of get more involved there. Nico Collins was the wide receiver one last week. Do we think that's going to continue? Are we on the Nico Collins train, or are we just kind of like watching the train go by and just hoping for the best?
Look, I thought Dalton Schultz was going to have that role going into the offseason. I thought he was the established veteran. I was pretty open about that. And week one did not go that way. Thankfully, it seemed to be pretty easy to get one of those top tight ends in the early rounds. So I have Dalton Schultz in a lot of leagues, but it's not every single one. That I would feel really bad right now if that was me. But that being said, I'm not convinced yet that Nico Collins is going to have these 11 targets every week, and I think Robert Woods had 10 as well. I'm not convinced that we're going to see that every week. I wouldn't say I'm just watching the train go by, but I'm not committed, if that makes sense. We'll
Go
see
one
how it
foot
goes
off,
this
one
week.
foot on.
Right. This game should be a little bit closer, so we'll see if they run the ball more than they did against the Ravens. It's felt like they were playing from behind all week last week. So this game just screams like extremely, extremely messy to me. I, I, I guess Nico Collins is the player you start if you got to start one. You're muted.
Not overly confident about any of them. I was, in fact, muted, actually. On the Colts side of the ball, I mean, this running back room, obviously a mess right now. Not a situation where I'm really ready to buy into any of these guys. Zach Moss apparently returning from injury, so if he comes in and he ends up being the guy, by all means, I'm happy for them. But when we look at the rest of this offense, Anthony Richardson actually had a great debut for the Colts, I thought, against the Jaguars. Played a really good game. He had one turnover, but he also managed to get that ball into the end zone as well. As far as Michael Pittman goes, 45% of Michael Pittman's points came on one play, and 6 of his 11 targets came on the last drive of the game. So there's two ways to kind of take that into perspective. One being when the game mattered most, Michael Pittman was the guy. When they needed to move the ball, Mike Pittman was the guy. Another way to kind of, it's one drive. You take one drive and you say like, okay, without that drive, you don't start Michael Pittman that week. You don't feel comfortable with what Michael Pittman gave you last week. So that's a situation where it's hit or miss. I'm sitting more on the hit side. I think Anthony Richardson's only going to get better. I know it's easy to sell Michael Pittman now, and I think he's going to be inconsistent on a week-to-week basis. I don't think he's going to see those 11 targets every week, but I am comfortable that Michael Pittman was the guy when it really came down to it.
Yep. I was just talking about it before with the Falcons. It's clear that they want to be running the ball every single play. And I think that's pretty clear with the Colts too. They want that ball in Anthony Richardson's hand, usually running it. But when it's in his hand and he's throwing it, it looked like Michael Pittman was the guy, especially, as you said, that last drive. And that's what gives me the most confidence is that game was a very close game. And Michael Pittman was seeing the ball every play. as a receiver, he's not known for his separation ability. He's more one of those like 50-50 jump ball guys, gives you the advantage there. And they were still throwing it to him every single play. I mean, that was extremely encouraging to me. I think this week I'm leaning towards starting him. I think it's a good matchup, and there might be another close game where they're throwing the ball again. And if that's the case, Pittman's the guy.
And a little takeaway from this as well is Kylan Granson had 6 targets. Jelani Woods currently on IR. He's going to be out 4 weeks. If you guys need an option at tight end, pick up Jelani Woods, throw him in your IR spot, and just wait it out. Once week 5 rolls around, we'll see him get back into the offense. He was talked up this whole offseason as a potential every down kind of piece on this team, and we know rookie quarterbacks and their tendencies to throw to tight ends just is kind of how the league works. So if you have Jelani Woods available in your league, you got an IR spot, and you manage to get an empty bench spot, that's a move I'm making 10 out of 10 times. So just keep that in mind as well. We got our last 1 o'clock game here. We got the Buccaneers versus the Bears, 2 teams who we look at and you go, but, with the Buccaneers side of the ball, Rachaad White, 79% of the offensive snaps, 19 touches. We mentioned how bad the Bears defense is. So I think this would be the week, if any, to kind of confidently put Rachaad White in your lineup. And if he can't produce this week, that's when I start to get concerned. But at the same time, this Bears defense let Aaron Jones run all over them last week. They let Romeo Doubs score on them. I mean, I'm just expecting a good game on this side of the football. Other than that, Chris Godwin, also like Chris Godwin this week. Mike Evans, he had a big week last week, but I think it was more of a lucky thing more than a confident weekly kind of thing. Luke, what are your thoughts? He might have just had to step out for a second, so that's not a problem at all. But Mike Evans, I think you can start him this week and feel fairly confident about what he could do. Chris Godwin, he's hey Luke, Chris Godwin, I think he's in a situation where he had 6 targets last week, and I don't know. Do you feel comfortable starting Chris Godwin or Mike Evans this week?
I feel comfortable starting Chris Godwin. Mike Evans less so. I do think, as we just said about Michael Pittman, Mike Evans is sort of that go up and get it jump ball guy. And while Pittman is sort of the focal point of that Colts offense, the Bucs do have Chris Godwin. And I think Chris Godwin's really going to be the guy that Baker is looking for on, any given play. I think it's more likely that Godwin is Baker's guy. Playing out of the slot tends to be more open right over the middle of the field. But I'm fading Mike Evans this week, and I'm comfortable starting Chris Godwin.
And then how do we feel with the Bears side of the football? Our guy, Roschon Johnson, actually had a pretty good game last week. He ended up actually leading this Bears backfield in snaps with 39% of the snaps. He turned 11 touches into about 17 points. He's got a pretty good matchup against this Buccaneers defense this week. So again, the projection on each of the fantasy apps is going to tell you he's projected 5 points. It's going to tell you he's projected 6 points, 4 points, whatever it is. But if you're in need of a desperate flex option, I don't hate Roschon at all this week. I think once Roschon starts stringing together like a couple, 2 or 3 games, we're going to see that projection go up and he'll be more reliable. But I'm not opposed to the idea of Roschon Johnson being in your lineups this week.
Especially when you consider this Buccaneers defense, as I said last week, has been one of the premier run defenses in the league every year. Roschon Johnson was the guy they were throwing the ball to out of the backfield last week. And that's what I think is the most encouraging point. I don't feel comfortable starting Khalil Herbert, who's going to get 35% of the touches and only run the football with 1 or 2 targets. I do feel comfortable starting Roschon if he gets a third of the snaps, but is getting thrown the ball every time he's on the field. What did he have, 6 targets last week?
Roschon Johnson led the team with 7 targets. He tied Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet, 7 targets, 18.9% target share. As you're mentioning, I mean, again, this is a situation where we talked about before the season. Do you want the guy who they're going to pass to out of this backfield? Do you want the guy who's going to be on pass protection when the game really matters? Or do you want the guy who's going to run the ball for 2 to 3 yards behind this terrible offensive line at the beginning of every game? So I think Roschon Johnson, as you mentioned, a good, desperate flex start for this week. trying to see. What do we think about DJ Moore? Are we off the DJ Moore train? He didn't really get target. He wasn't even the top 4 in targets on his team this past week. Darnell Mooney's still up there, which is mind blowing to me.
I'm not scared yet. I mentioned this earlier, talking about the Falcons-Packers game. Jair Alexander was all over DJ Moore, and he had something to say about it in his post-game press conference. So he was very public about the fact that he locked down DJ Moore. I'm not too concerned quite yet. I think, if anything, last week was an encouragement for DJ Moore in that the Bears threw the ball a lot more than we saw them throw it last year. And I think that those are bound to start going DJ Moore's way eventually. So I'm not panicking yet. I think he's startable this week, even in what could be a tough matchup. I think he's startable.
Sweet. So Cardinals versus Giants, first 4:00 game here. Luke, our Giants fan here. How do we feel about the Giants' performance last week? Let's do a little game here. Let's describe it in one word. I'll give you a second to create that word in your head, but describe the Giants' performance last week in one word.
Death. I mean, I have a couple of friends who are Giants fans here with me, and I went over to their house, watch the Giants game last week. We were all so excited. We weren't really expecting to win, but we were expecting, to see some good offense, good defense, be competitive against the Cowboys, and sort of bring some momentum into this week. Oh man, it was brutal. It was really, really bad. I mean, we watched every single snap of that game somehow, and I don't think too many people did that last week unless they were Cowboys fans. It was rough. I can't even talk about it for that long. But what I will say is, I know Rich coming from a Giants fan, but I think this week, if you're going to rebound, it's the time. You're playing against the Cardinals, who are on paper the worst team in the league. Nobody's scared of them. We saw Sam Howell, a 5th-round pick in his second ever start in the NFL, give up like 2 or 3 fumbles and still win. Yeah. So if there's a team to rebound against, this is going to be the week. And they pretty much have to do it this week because they're playing San Francisco on primetime football next week. And that's not going to go well either, I'm sure. So this is the week to do it. Pretty much everything I said about them last week, I'm just going to apply to this week. I will say that first drive that ended in the blocked field goal return for a touchdown looked good before that. They were running the ball a lot. Saquon looked good. Daniel Jones had a lot of rushing attempts, even on that first drive before the game got away. And I think he had 15 rushing attempts last week, which is going to be something to look out for in the future. Daniel Jones running the ball for fantasy is great for quarterbacks. But yeah, that first drive is really how I hope at least the Giants offense looks this week. It's a good matchup for pretty much everybody. I'm starting Daniel Jones, obviously starting Barkley, starting Waller, who should be playing, even with the news about a sort of lingering, again, hamstring injury this week. Big rebound week for the Giants. They need it bad.
Yeah, I'm starting the Giants defense in a couple weeks, so kind of about that, but we'll see. I'm hoping, as you mentioned, they get kind of that bounce back here. On the Cardinals side of the football, something that's kind of gone a little bit under the radar. Zach Ertz, 10 targets last week in his first game back. If this becomes a common occurrence, I mean, we're just talking about a team that's going to be forced to throw the ball every single week. We're talking about a guy who, in the tight end position, 10 targets on a weekly basis is an extremely rare thing to kind of come across. So I think Zach Ertz, in that conversation of Luke Musgrave, Jake Ferguson, Sam Laporta, I think Zach Ertz belongs in that conversation as a potential season-long addition for that tight end spot. So I'm liking Zach Ertz this week if you're in a desperate situation. And just in general, I don't think there's too many people in this Cardinals that I'm excited about to watch this week. James Conner, he got the ball a ton last week, but he didn't really do much with it. Credit to the offense and the offensive line. But one thing that did look good actually last week was the Cardinals defense. They don't have all the pieces that they should, but it looks like Jonathan Gannon's actually getting something done with this defense. So it's going to be interesting to see going forward. Also here, let's talk about the Rams and the 49ers. So Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, the two biggest names on waivers this week. Do we expect the Kyren Williams train to kind of continue? Are we on this train? Or are we watching this train go by as well? What are our thoughts? And I will say first, I think Puka Nacua has some season long value, even when Cooper Kupp returns. He played most of his snaps from the perimeter, and Cooper Kupp, as we know, is going to play on the inside. I think this is a team that's starved for more targets, or more so to more weapons. And we saw Tyler Higbee not be as involved as we were all expecting with Cooper Kupp out. They don't really have too many answers at the running back position. Wide receiver wise, you have Van Jefferson, you have Tutu Atwell, guys who were not all that productive. So I think Puka Nacua really does have season long value, but he did not practice yesterday all of a sudden due to an oblique injury. Today is going to be important. What do you think, Luke? What do we think about this Rams offense here?
Look, I hope that oblique injury is not serious at all, and I hope this is just a precaution because oblique injuries are nasty. I mean, I watch a lot of baseball, and they hold baseball players out for 2 months sometimes. So I'm hoping this isn't too serious. I grabbed Nacua in a couple of leagues. Thankfully, didn't have to overspend for him. I'm seeing on Twitter people are spending like 80% of their budget on Puka Nacua. I mean, it's crazy. I got away with 8%, but again, as you said, the season long upside I think is there. 15 targets last week. That's absolutely crazy. Those are the Cooper Kupp numbers we were seeing during his legendary season. And until Cooper Kupp comes back, that might continue. And even when Cooper Kupp does come back, I think he'll be a solid 2. We saw how the Rams used Odell down the stretch as their number 2. We'll see if Nacua can live up to that. But definitely upside there in the usage alone. Kyren Williams, 2 touchdowns last week, as you said. This is an incredibly tough matchup. We'll just say it right out the gate. This is going to be a lot tougher of a matchup. I'm not starting Kyren Williams this week. One quick name that I think everyone's ignoring is Tutu Atwell, who also had 119 yards for the Rams last week and double-digit targets. I don't think he quite has that season-long upside, especially because he was really the slot guy with Cooper Kupp out, and Cooper Kupp will just assume that role once he returns. But until Cooper Kupp's back, I don't see why he can't be the sort of quick drop-off pass target for Matt Stafford, especially, again, tough matchup this week. He's probably going to be looking for quick options. Tutu Atwell out of the slot might be that guy.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great take, especially if Puka Nacua does miss this game with that oblique injury, as you mentioned, because I've had an oblique injury before, and it is not very fun at all. Because obviously I'm an athlete, and I just kind of get those injuries. But the 49ers, I'm not an athlete, guys. From the 49ers side of the football, Christian McCaffrey, he led all running backs in snaps. He led all running back in touches. This is exactly what you want if you draft Christian McCaffrey with your top 5 picks. So nothing to be concerned about there. But Brandon Ayuk, 2 touchdowns last week. Is that going to continue? Is he a sell option? I don't know. I think the touchdown, whenever you look at the touchdowns aspect for a player, those are very unpredictable. So it's not like you can't look at a matchup and be like, oh, this guy's going to score. You can look at a matchup and be like, this guy's going to have a good game, or this guy might get a lot of yardage because he's got a good matchup on his corner. But for the most part, you're not going to look at a game and be like, this guy's scoring 2 touchdowns. So it's harder to predict, but the production and the targets and the usage was very much there for Brandon Ayuk. So super encouraging. He's got the trust of Brock Purdy. I'm going to be firing up Brandon Ayuk in every league that I have just about every single week until proven otherwise. I think Debo, he's a candidate to be traded halfway through the season. I mean, if they're trying to make a Super Bowl run, I'd imagine they try to keep him on that roster. But it just seems like Debo is not being used in the way he was before this team acquired Christian McCaffrey. So he just doesn't seem like that guy anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. Debo Samuel is basically viewed as like the Christian McCaffrey light, if that makes sense. It feels like they're used in the same exact way. And if you're going to use them both like that, why not use McCaffrey more? Because, I mean, we saw what he did last week. And to that point, it looks like Brandon Ayuk is the so-called wide receiver 1 in this offense. I mean, we saw last year as well, Brock Purdy loved throwing the ball Brandon Ayuk's way. I know Debo Samuel was hurt for a lot of that point, but Debo was on the field. George Kittle was on the field. Christian McCaffrey was on the field and we saw this performance from Ayuk. I don't think he has the upside to go for 35 points every week like he did last week. As you said, those touchdowns, I mean, to an extent, they're just sort of lucky and hard to predict. But I think the usage is going to be there. I think it's going to continue to be there. There might be a couple of sour weeks, as I like to say about the Niners. You have all these players, they can't all produce every week. So I'm sure there will be weeks where Debo gets his and Kittle gets his, and that leaves Ayuk sort of to the side. But in general, I'm trending more in the direction of liking Ayuk every week and sort of starting to fade off the Debo train.
Absolutely. Moving into this game here, we got the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Jets. Unfortunate, Aaron Rodgers, torn Achilles. Wild kind of game. Someone said Josh Allen completed more passes to the Jets than Aaron Rodgers did, which is very unfortunate for Josh Allen and, of course, Aaron Rodgers. When you look at this Jets offense with Zach Wilson, how are they going to kind of progress forward? Because we saw last week Breece Hall with limited touches and limited snaps absolutely shredded this Bills defense. And then on top of that, if you look at, Dalvin Cook, he was very much involved. Garrett Wilson, if he wasn't an absolute god, he probably wouldn't have got that touchdown last week. We'd probably be very upset with where we have Garrett Wilson. But when it comes to Garrett Wilson and what I'm doing with him, if I have Garrett Wilson on my team, if there's one thing I hate, it's selling a player at their lowest point. Could Garrett Wilson get worse than he did last week? Yes. But the mantra and the belief right now is that Garrett Wilson is at an extremely low point because of the fact that Aaron Rodgers just got hurt and you have Zach Wilson as your starting quarterback. But with Garrett Wilson, things can actually start to go up at some point during the season. If Zach Wilson improves, if the Jets get a veteran quarterback, or if they start someone else at quarterback other than Zach Wilson. We saw what he did with Joe Flacco last year. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for Garrett Wilson to still be that wide receiver one. I just unfortunately don't think we're going to get the guy we paid for at the end of the first, beginning of the second round. So it's unfortunate and sucks. But I don't think you should be selling Garrett Wilson right now if you're just going to be getting pennies in return.
Exactly. I mean, again, the post yesterday of our buys, sells, and holds, 50 comments saying, why are you holding Garrett Wilson? What are you doing? It's because you're not going to get anything for him. There's no reason to trade a player at his absolute lowest. It's a tough situation. It stinks. We already said I'm a Giants fan, and I couldn't even believe what I was watching that last week. I felt bad. I mean, I have nothing against the Jets, but just that sort of, New York rivalry, I still felt horrible. It just stinks all around. And from a fantasy perspective, it doesn't get much happier. I'm one of those Garrett Wilson owners, and he's just in a couple of leagues going to take out the value that I hopefully stole in Calvin Ridley now. That might have just swapped, and that might sound like a good thing, but Calvin Ridley, all the value that Calvin Ridley could bring to me is going to could potentially get thrown out now with Garrett Wilson dropping into that more sort of tier 3 of fantasy wide receiver. Breece Hall, though, I want to end this on a happier note. Breece Hall was my guy last year. I loved him out of the draft. I loved him in fantasy leagues, and he looked absolutely amazing before he tore his ACL, and he looked absolutely amazing last week. I was pretty upset that I couldn't really draft him in too many leagues this year because the price was just too high, considering the fact that he's coming off that torn ACL and they just signed Dalvin Cook. But after seeing them both play last week, I can't imagine that the Jets are going to continue making this a pure 50-50 split or anything. I mean, Breece Hall just looked like the far better back. It didn't really look close. I think his usage will begin to increase very soon once they feel like he's ready 100% off that ACL.
Yeah, and Dalvin I wasn't too impressed with last week, which, could change down the line. I think one thing he does well is pass catching. So they could have Dalvin in on more 2-minute drills and stuff like that. But I agree. I think Breece has to be the guy early into games. If you want to wear down those defenses, if you need some chunk plays, I think Breece is going to be your guy. And I think this is also going to be a situation where we're going to see the Jets offense kind of turn a little bit into what the Falcons are doing. in terms of you have a quarterback you're not too sure of at this point. Why not run the ball down the other team's throat as much as you possibly can, especially when you have two viable running backs with Dalvin Cook and Brees Hall. So I think this is a situation where Brees Hall is going to be a weekly start. Dalvin Cook with some receiving upside added in, I think could definitely be a weekly start as well. So I'm comfortable with the Jets running backs on a weekly basis. The Cowboys have the best defense in the NFL, but that's not going to stop me from putting these guys in my lineup if I'm in a situation where I need a flex play or I need a running back too for this week. So yeah, I'm comfortable with those two guys. And when you look at the Cowboys offense, Tony Pollard last week, super encouraging how he was used. If this game wasn't a wash and if this game wasn't 30-0 in the fourth quarter or whatever it was, we probably would have seen a lot more of Tony Pollard.
Second quarter.
Second quarter, yeah, that's right. But the options behind Pollard aren't that great. So I think Pollard, as long as he's healthy, as long as he's on the field, he's going to be their go-to guy in every single play. So I'm comfortable. Pollard's at RB1. He's exactly what you wanted when you drafted him. CeeDee Lamb against Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner got cooked last week. I mean, Stephon Diggs was getting he was winning just about every battle against Sauce Gardner. That doesn't mean Sauce Gardner's bad or that's going to happen again this week, but just don't scare yourself off of CeeDee Lamb. Brandon Cooks, last I saw, I thought he was dealing with concussion. Just want to confirm that before I lie to the people here. He's currently questionable. Yeah, he's got a knee injury. He did not practice Thursday. He's apparently showing improvement, so he has a chance on playing. But again, Jake Ferguson is in a position where Brandon Cooks is out. CeeDee Lamb has Sauce Gardner over him. You got Tony Pollard in the backfield. I think Jake Ferguson, not a home run hit because there's no such thing as a home run hit for tight ends these days. But in a matchup against the Jets, I think this is a very good opportunity for a guy like Jake Ferguson to come in and be a great play. If I have DFS, I'm starting him. If I'm in a situation where I don't have an elite tight end, I think Jake Ferguson's also a great start this week. So I'm a big Jake Ferguson fan right now. He's got 7 targets last week. He led the team in targets. Is there anything else to add to these Cowboys players here?
No, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I would maybe look to see if the Cowboys throw CeeDee Lamb in the slot a little bit just to get him off that Sauce Gardner matchup. That would be interesting. And I mean, he was used. I can't really go off his usage numbers last week. Again, that game was just over from the beginning. But again, Jake Ferguson, I do like. I picked him up in a bunch of leagues. I think they're going to pretty much use him the same way they've been using tight ends for these past few years. I think it's encouraging what we saw last week, and I think he's a pretty good player. I don't see why he can't be one of those solid, like every week low-end tight ends, the low-end tight end ones that you could throw in your lineup every week.
Absolutely. Big fans of Jake Ferguson on the show. Broncos versus Commanders. I think when you look at the Broncos side of the ball, this is a game where they could really take that step forward. They lost last week to the Raiders some way, somehow. But Javonte Williams, I'll start with him. He was a really encouraging usage last week. He had 19 opportunities. And as the game went on, it seemed like he only got better and better. I think that can come true this week as well. Washington's a tough defense. But Javonte Williams had 6 targets last week. And Sean Payton said going into the year that they were going to use these running backs in the passing game. So if I have Javonte Williams, he said himself he's feeling better and better. And his knee felt better as the game went on. He's coming back from ACL tear, but I'm starting Javonte Williams. And a lot of people forget that before he got injured, he was considered one of the best pure runners in the league. It kind of seems like a Nick Chubb situation where like he's a really great running back. I think he led the league in his rookie year. I think he led the team in broken tackles. I keep saying I think. I'm almost certain that's the case, but just know Javonte Williams is a really good running back, and he was prior to that injury. If he gets back to that even a little bit, I think you're sitting really pretty with Javonte Williams. Jerry Jeudy also practicing in full. He's expected to be suiting up for this game as well. I think Jerry Jeudy's a great start also against this Washington secondary. So what are your thoughts there?
Very big Jerry Jeudy guy. I'm excited for him to be playing this week. He was Russell Wilson's favorite target most of last season. And as I said last week, this offense was putrid last year, and Jerry Jeudy was still a top 25 wide receiver. The offense looked better than it did last week. It didn't look great. It wasn't perfect, but it certainly should be better than it was last year. And that means Jerry Jeudy's stock is rising. I'm starting Jerry Jeudy any league I have him this week. Javonte Williams as well. I think, again, good start this week. I'm very excited to see what he can do. I have him in a couple of leagues, my dynasty leagues. I'm excited. I hope he starts to get more and more worked in. I hope he stays healthy. That's been the thing with him, is the health.
And then on the Commanders side of the ball, Brian Robinson coming off a pretty decent game last week, but again, that had to do against the Arizona Cardinals. We don't know exactly what this offense is going to look like against the Broncos. I think they're going to be forced to pass the ball a little more, which they didn't do a lot of last week. We saw Terry not really do much. Jahan Dotson had a healthy amount of targets, but he didn't really produce with the targets that he was given. Do we feel comfortable starting any of these pass catchers for the Commanders? And I'll include Logan Thomas in the conversation, who had 8 targets last week. Absolutely asinine how that happened. But what are your thoughts here on the Commanders' pass catchers?
You might have to include Curtis Samuel in the conversation too.
That's right.
We saw what Pat Surtain did to Devontae Adams last week, and I think we're going to see that with Terry McLaurin this week, unfortunately for him. So similar to last week, I'm a fan of Jahan Dotson. I think Curtis Samuel is flex worthy. Logan Thomas, I'm going to say wait and see. I just don't have that much faith. But this is going to be a tough matchup for them, tough matchup for Sam Howell. This will be telling, and we'll see what the Commanders look like against a real defense. So if I have a player I'm playing, it's going to be Jahan Dotson this week. But I think Curtis Samuel has that flex upside as well.
And going on to the Sunday night game, Patriots versus Dolphins. As a Patriots fan, I'm very encouraged by what I saw from Mac Jones. 300 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. That's the first time he's ever done that in his career with the Patriots. Again, the Dolphins defense, right now they don't have Jalen Ramsey. It's in a position where I feel comfortable starting Mac Jones if you're in need for a desperate streamer. At the same time, I think the biggest talk I've gotten this week is Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne. Do we trust Kendrick Bourne to do what he did last week again against the Dolphins here? And I'm going to say no, because I'm expecting Devontae Parker back. And I'm expecting Devontae Parker to come back and be the wide receiver 1 for this team. Especially, I call it a revenge game against the Dolphins where he was for so many years. But I like Devontae Parker a lot as potential wide receiver 1 on this team. And if we're actually going to be getting value out of these pass catchers in New England this year, then I'm going to be buying into guys like Devontae Parker, potentially Hunter Henry, and Ramondre Stevenson. Another thing with Ramondre Stevenson last week, he wasn't all that productive or all that efficient, but he was battling a pretty nasty stomach bug leading up to the actual game day. So a week of being stomach bug free, I imagine that Ramondre Stevenson is going to have a much better outing this week against the Dolphins. On the Dolphins side of the ball, we saw what Tua and Tyreek did last week. I really don't think any one of the Patriots is in a position to be covering Tyreek to the point where they're going to stop him from what he's going to do. But for some reason, this game is still screaming Jalen Waddle to me. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so I'll start with the Patriots. As you said, the pass catching situation is a little murky. I will give you props for telling absolutely everybody to put Juju nowhere near their fantasy lineup or in their fantasy drafts. Just keep him away, stay away. And it seemed, there's reports going around that he's the wide receiver 5 in this offense all of a sudden. He wasn't on the field during that last 2-minute drill there. They had rookie 4th round picks on the field and no Juju. So that's an interesting situation to monitor. The running backs, I find it pretty interesting that all the talks about Kendrick Bourne, no one's talking about the fact that Ramondre Stevenson had 11 targets last week and Ezekiel Elliott had 7. Somehow, that's 18 targets to your top 2 running backs. Zeke didn't look particularly efficient either, and he fumbled last week. So I would look for Ramondre to get more and more involved, if that's even possible, as he recovers from that stomach bug. From the Dolphins' perspective, again, you said last week the Patriots' defense, their expertise is taking away your number 1 option, and I just don't think that's possible. Unfortunately, in this case, Tyreek Hill. The best thing you could do is maybe triple cover him and then save your number 1 corner for Jalen Waddle. But I don't even think that'll work. It's such a game-breaking receiver room here in Miami. But with that being said, there's something to the fact that Jalen Waddle didn't get used very much last week, and it just feels like he's going to break out this week. I get what you're saying there. I have that same sort of gut feeling that Jalen Waddle's going to have a big week. I'm obviously not saying bench Tyreek Hill. That would be absolutely ridiculous at this point. He might be the MVP favorite at this point through 1 week. But yeah, I sort of feel that as well. Sort of Jalen Waddle, like little gut feeling. Do you want to even talk about the Dolphins running backs at this point?
Sell Raheem Mostert. Sell Raheem Mostert
with
That's
the injury.
So apparently Raheem Mostert practiced in full. There's not really any concern about the knee anymore. But this is like a precursor to what we see every single year with Raheem Mostert of just like, oh, he's going to be injured. He's going to miss this game. It's bound to happen at some point or another. I also did want to circle back on the Ramondre Stevenson. He had 6 targets, not 11.
Oh, but I must have looked at the wrong number.
you might have looked at rushing attempts or touches or whatever.
Maybe.
But Zeke did still have 7 targets, and 6 and 7 targets is still 13 targets to running backs. That's a lot. And I expect Zeke is not going to be nearly as involved as a pass catcher this week with Ramondre Stevenson stomach bug free. But Zeke, honestly, he didn't look as bad as I thought he would. He wasn't too efficient, but he was involved, and he did have a little more burst than from what I remember seeing with Zeke. So that's very encouraging on its own for this offense. But again, I'm not looking to start Zeke really at any point. Moving on to Monday night, we got 2 games on Monday night. Panthers versus Saints. Bryce Young, not a great debut, not the worst debut we've ever seen. It just seems like there's really inconsistent pass catching options for the Panthers right now. That being Jonathan Mingo being a rookie, and then you got Adam Thielen, who's not really as involved as a lot of people might have hoped. But for the rest of this team, I mean, Miles Sanders, he did get a ton of touches. I think he got 22 touches last week. This is a much tougher matchup. Saints are typically pretty good against the run. So I'm a little weary about starting Miles Sanders this week. On the other side of the ball, the Saints, we saw what Derek Carr was able to do through the year. I think the Panthers defense right now, J.C. Horn also just got injured. He's expected to miss 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm saying Chris Olave. I'm saying Michael Thomas. I'm saying maybe even Rashid Shaheed should be in your lineups this week. Not too excited about what Javon Williams did on the ground. Juwan Johnson, he was okay last week, but it's not really what we wanted or what we expected. So I'm going all fours for these Saints wide receivers and these Panthers players. I'm going to be a little weary of. Anything else you wanted to add for either of these 2 teams?
Before I say anything, I wanted to. You didn't mention Hayden Hurst last week. That was a good call there.
Yes. Thank you, Luke. Thank you.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst is what, a top 3 tight end right now. There's your Kelsey replacement. That was a valuable segment last week. But yeah,
if only I made a video from.
The Saints receivers all seem startable, and they might be startable every week if the Saints play like they did last week. And again, did they score 1 touchdown last week, I think? And all 3 of their receivers were very fantasy startable, especially in leagues where if you value kick and punt returns. Rashid Shaheed had 120 just return yards last week. Also scored a receiving touchdown. So that's going to be incredibly valuable if you have those return yards there. That's 12 points right off the bat. Jamal Williams did not do much last week. I think this is a spot to rebound. It's clear, like he was the main back last week. They did feature him. It's just that he didn't do much with the touches. Maybe we'll see a little different this week. I'm not taking Jamal Williams out of my lineup yet, especially because you sort of have that natural, once we hit week 4, he's out of your lineup anyway. So if you have him, you had him to start these 3 weeks. May as well. That's the situation I find myself in.
And something interesting too is Kendre Miller is supposed to be making his debut this week as well. He missed week 1, so we'll see what Kendre Miller kind of has to offer for this offense, and we'll see how he affects Jamal Williams. But let's move on to the Steelers and Browns here. Steelers did not look great last week. Kenny Pickett struggling. Deontay Johnson, some reports saying he might miss 4 weeks. Some reports saying that he's day-to-day. We still don't have a clear answer of whether Deontay is going to line up this week or not. But one person who I think is kind of falling under the radar here, I mean, obviously we know George Pickens should be the main beneficiary. Calvin Austin, last week playing, I believe he was in the slot, had 6 targets. And if Deontay Johnson is going to miss more time, I'm expecting Calvin Johnson to kind of be that guy in the slot. And we're talking about punt return. I believe he's on punt return as well. So definitely some opportunity for a guy like Calvin Johnson to be a factor in this game. And then Allen Robinson, 8 targets. How do we feel about Allen Robinson getting 8 targets last week? I mean, that's just disgusting.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting situation to monitor. I mean, the Steelers, sort of like the Giants, I'm going to be a little charitable. Another really bad matchup. The Steelers had a tough one last week, especially, and I sort of alluded to this last week. It kind of stinks for them that Kenny Pickett, George Pickens had all this momentum from the preseason. Kenny Pickett had like a perfect passer rating in the preseason just to run into the 49ers week one. That just stinks for them. So I'm going to be a little charitable. However, unlike the Giants, they have another tough matchup this week. And if this spirals out of control fast, there might not be any return from that. So I know George Pickens should be the number one. I'm not too excited about George Pickens. I'm not too excited about Allen Robinson and his 8 targets. That maybe that was more of an emergency type of deal, just throwing the ball because they had no one to throw to. I do think Calvin Austin has upside there out of the slot if they continue to use him. I feel like he could be the new Deontay Johnson, and that George Pickens isn't going to be the guy that gets 11 targets every single week like Deontay Johnson does. George Pickens is the red zone guy. George Pickens is the big jump ball guy. I don't think he's the 40% target share guy. I think if anybody, that will be Calvin Austin. And just from a tight end perspective, Pat Freiermuth scored the touchdown last week, didn't do much else. But with the state of the tight end market these days, I think it's pretty promising for him that he scored last week, period. And now with Deontay out, that opens up a lot of targets. I think he could get involved a little bit more and make himself a higher end tight end.
And for the Browns side of the ball, I mean, Nick Chubb's usage was encouraging. Jerome Ford getting 15 carries wasn't exactly on the docket either. But, the way that game was going, it seems like a Tyler Algier kind of situation where they're just kind of trying to close out the game, and they did so with Jerome Ford. On top of that, Elijah Moore, he looked pretty good. He looked pretty involved, so he'll be likely a consistent part of this offense. I think he's a buy low candidate potentially as well. But, yeah. Encouraging stuff for the Browns offense. I'm hoping for a better game from Amari Cooper this week. If you drafted Amari Cooper, probably in the 4th round, he should be your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 if you went running back or tight end early. So it's tough, but hoping for better games going forward from Amari Cooper. That's going to wrap up week 2. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you guys are going on Underdog, make sure you use code ANALYST. You're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Luke, thank you so much for joining me, and we're going to see you guys next week for week 3.